talk to you guys a little bit about some open educational resources and our attempts to create more equitable educational experiences in some of our biology courses. So again, I am Amanda Ziegler, and then this is my colleague to my right, Dr. Andy Shepard, and we're just going to go through our material today, show you guys a little bit about what we've done in our courses, and hopefully allow you to leave with some new knowledge and ways to. And again, hopefully provide you guys with some ideas that you might want to incorporate into some of your own courses or into some of your own resources that you're using in your respective positions. All right, so our session outcomes for today. So hopefully by the end of this session, you guys will be able to describe what an equitable classroom is. We want to allow you guys to actually learn to identify a few various open educational resources as well that could be potentially useful for some of your own courses, and then potentially create your own open educational resource for your communities and beyond. So our outline, again, we're going to go through a little bit about explaining what equity is in education. We'll talk to you guys about open educational resources as well. We're then going to transition into some work that we have been doing with one of our biology labs so that you can see sort of how this sort of transition and this sort of movement into using open educational resources has been within this course. We'll talk a little bit about what we did historically and then how we've, again, transitioned and navigated into now using more of these open educational resources for our students. And then lastly, we'll go into some future directions and then talk a little bit about how we can enhance equity every time in our courses. Again, we want to make sure that we are providing the most, I guess we could say, successful academic environment for our students, and just talk about some ways that we can allow our students to be more successful in their coursework by allowing for equity and, again, the use of these open educational resources in our classes.
So, as we dig in a little deeper here, what exactly is equity in education? So, equity, first of all, we're kind of defining this as students are given the resources that they need to be successful. Not necessarily all students are getting exactly the same thing. So, our students are coming from diverse backgrounds with diverse knowledge sets already. And so, they have all of this experience that they're ready to put to use, but it's not going to be the same across the board. And so equity is kind of giving students very specifically what they need. It's adaptable. It's very individual focused. All right. And it's fair to the students. It's really a big part of this, as we'll see, is knowing your students as well. It also helps kind of start the process of countering the opportunity gap in education and beyond. All right.
So Stephanie says one thing that has increased with the pandemic is now the option to stream class as well. Oh, that's a really good point. I have many students with other circumstances where they try but can't always come to class, so now they have more opportunity to also attend lecture. And Lexi says providing simultaneous streaming online of a face-to-face class. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. This is a great example, actually, of some equity when it comes to sessions here in the CTE is, again, kind of providing more resources for our students. Yeah, and that's something, too, that, I know I'm kind of guilty. I didn't even really think about it pre-pandemic, but now it's kind of interesting thinking about things going forward.
Well, and I have a question about that, because that's an issue that's been popping up on different blogs and listservs and such for higher education is now professors are not required to do it, so they don't want to do it. And so are we going backwards again because of that? So maybe that's something you can address. I don't know.
I feel like it depends a lot on teaching style. I feel like the way you approach things. I know for me, I always think I'm trying to teach inclusively, trying to think about all the students. And that's definitely something that I know as long as they'll keep the cameras going, I'll probably keep streaming. But yeah, me personally, I would kind of feel sad that we'd go back to the kind of the old ways.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to think about progressing forward and not letting the pandemic kind of go to waste in a sense, what we've learned.
Yeah. I found that for me, I mean, it's a few extra clicks at the beginning of class to get your session set up, but honestly, it cuts down on a lot of the sort of outside of the class time things where I used to get lots of emails from students, I was sick today, I missed lecture notes, can you do a quick review of the lecture? Or, the infamous, did I miss anything important?
Yes.
That sort of thing. So I think that when we're sharing screens or streaming for the courses, that it actually cuts down on, interactions after the fact that could potentially turn out to be maybe a negative interaction at times, because students get really upset if I don't want to redo an entire lecture for them, in a 30-minute time period in an office hour setting or something. So it helps make things easier for me, I think, after the fact, just by making it available and having it online for students to watch and see. And if they want to go back and watch the recording later on, they can do it on their own time, and they can go back, and it's useful information. They can use it for studying. It's not like they're going to have to, really quickly scramble to write every little thing down that I'm saying in class too. They have that information available to them.
So again, kind of looking a little bit more at what equity actually is, and this is kind of one of the sort of famous examples that a lot of times when you're looking at equality versus equity, I kind of have three individuals here trying to check out this baseball game going on of different heights. You see, equality, you're kind of giving everyone the same box, but equity, you're kind of changing it up based on individual needs, right? So this little individual here, I'm assuming it looks like maybe a family setting here, but he's able to see the game now. Everyone's able to see what's going on, versus equality where there's still some individuals that are left out here. And so again, an equitable classroom kind of tailored to individual needs. And this is something too, I've kind of encountered this in teaching biochemistry. Biochemistry's kind of got a reputation. Students, it's kind of up there with organic chemistry. They are not big fans. And we found that some of the stuff on the books in terms of prerequisite courses, Organic Chemistry 2 for Biology 541, this biochemistry course, is the only prereq. A lot of times students come in, and if they haven't had cell and molecular biology, it's much more difficult. It's a very kind of uphill battle. And so we've kind of, and the first time I taught it, I said the enzyme named kinase. I just said kinase, and you could see like 30% of the class is like looking around like, y'all know what that is? Like, and yeah, all the other the individuals that have taken 302 were like, well, yeah. And so I started providing more resources then. So I actually found an open educational resource, a textbook for biochemistry. I provided to them. I provided them some great YouTube channels as well, with kind of short videos that kind of got to the point really good. And I'll provide that each time I teach biochemistry now. And I found, I guess this was like the third or fourth time I taught it last semester. And when I said kinase, there were a lot less confused looks. So hopefully it's helping there. It also encourages connections between the student and the instructor. And this is something, again, you have to kind of know your students in terms of what resources they need. If I hadn't kind of seen the students being like, oh, what's the kinase? That's kind of something as well. And me, when I always approach teaching, I'm very laid back, talking to the students, getting to know them really well. And so they get, actually told me afterwards, they're like, yeah, I've never heard of kinase before. I was like, okay, all right. So gotta know your students. And the instructor also acknowledges all students in the classroom. And the material covered in the class is from diverse individuals, right? Representation definitely matters. Now, what are some barriers to an equitable classroom? One big one is access to materials, right? Kind of going back to that College Board number, if students are having to budget almost $1,300 a semester for textbooks, that is a huge barrier in terms of access to materials. So that's where open educational resources kind of come into the picture in helping to start to create a bit more of an equitable experience there. And so open educational resources are just materials that are published under kind of an open license. And a little bit of history that kind of first named back in 1998. There was this declaration in Cape Town in 2007. And typically it depends on the source and the license that it's published under, but there's a lot of flexibility in terms of open educational resources. So you can kind of tailor things, you can adjust things, you can make changes, again, depending on kind of the license there. And this is great too, especially when you're looking at kind of overall costs. So from 2003 to 2013, the cost of textbooks tripled at kind of over the rate of normal inflation. So they were really kind of, it's mad like Scrooge McDuck vibes. Like I'm just imagining them in a swimming pool of gold. And so this ranges from textbooks to whole curriculum that you can find online. And it's really helped in terms of providing this open educational resources. It's really allowing our students more access. So completely free of charge for our students. Now, how are they typically published? Nowadays, like most of the world, it's online, right? Online textbooks and media. A lot of times, if you want, you can also get kind of paper copies ordered through Amazon, sometimes even local printers. Instructors can have that set up as well. And it's available the first day of class. Now, you may be wondering about quality, and it's kind of the same as any other sort of course materials, right? You kind of have to go through, and you're kind of the expert on that subject, so you get to decide, hey, is this something that we're actually, is this legit or not, in a sense there.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
I think when OER first started, there was a lot of hesitation because we were worried that the quality and it being vetted was not there. So we didn't think that was something we should use. I feel like that's still continued. And it hasn't broken through yet for people to say, oh, OER is valid and valuable and we should be using it.
Yeah. And that's something too that, I know me, I always go through, like before, whenever I actually was telling students to buy textbooks, I'd actually go through the textbook and see like, hey, is this something that I think is worth the student's money? And luckily, yeah, open educational resources, the ones that I've checked out, man, they've made big leaps and bounds from what, because I don't really recall kind of the early days. But I know like a lot of the like OpenStax, oh man, there's some amazing resources there that are really good, kind of through Rice University too, which I think may help in terms of kind of the sort of stigma, like kind of showing, hey, it's university, look. But yeah, it's not someone in like their basement. Maybe their mom's basement. So do they work though, right? And it's funny because we were actually digging into this a little bit more in one of the kind of papers that's referenced quite a bit. Author Nick Colvard, he was actually a graduate student here at the University of South Carolina. It was funny because I actually sent him an email after we were reading his paper. I was like, dude, what are the chances? He's down at UGA now. But they actually found that, hey, turns out whenever you're using open educational resources in a course, there's an increase in student grades. So surprise, surprise, if students can actually get to that material, they can actually potentially use it. They found that DFW rates also decreased, which is great. And also, this was further amplified in Pell Grant recipients and other underrepresented groups. So kind of the sort of beginning, I think we'll see a lot more sort of work into this as well. Now, how can you find OERs? Quick Google search oftentimes will bring up a good bit there. Some of these repositories have been kind of building since the early 2000s. One of the most common is oercommons.org. There's quite a bit that you can find in there. You can look in terms of subject, education level, all sorts of interesting things there. Now, I'd mentioned this before as well. OpenStax has just a ton of interesting resources there. Lots of great intro books. And that's funny because we actually switched. I know there was a section of 102 lecture in biology that I was actually using the OpenStax with. That was really well received. And then again, can you make adjustments? Kind of depends on the license there. But check out that license and adjust it well if able. But yeah, I wanted to show y'all too, with OpenStax, they've even got kind of a getting started guide for instructors, kind of the usual thing that you'd expect with a textbook. And it's pretty easy to get an instructor access. They kind of vet you real quick and then give you access relatively quickly. And they kind of provide everything that a sort of a traditional textbook does as well.
All right, so now that we've given you guys some information on open educational resources and equitability in the classroom, we want to talk to you guys a little bit about how we've, again, tried to make a transition into using more open educational resources in some of our biology courses, specifically with our Biology 302 lab. So this is our cell and molecular biology lab. This is a lab that's taken primarily by biological sciences majors, biochemistry and molecular biology, exercise science, and maybe a handful of a few other science majors as well. I know in the past, when I was a grad student, I taught some marine science majors too that would take this lab sometimes for an elective credit. So we see a wide range of science majors who take this course to get a lab credit for their science curriculum. We can see students ranging anywhere from the sophomore level to seniors, so we have kind of a wide range of students in terms of knowledge they may be coming in with already when they start to take this course. We tend to offer about 10 sections of this class per academic semester, and each of these sections can house about 24 students. So we're reaching about 250 students a semester or so with these particular lab sections. Now, again, this particular course does have a bit of a reputation. It's been known as a rigorous lab, but also a pretty useful lab if students, kind of take the time to realize why we're asking them to do certain things within this course. But it does have this sort of reputation of being a little bit difficult. We know that the curriculum is sort of set up in a way that we're going to challenge students in this course. We're going to teach them a lot about these molecular biology techniques. And then once they've learned some of these techniques, we're going to kind of put the ball in their court for the second half of the class. And we're going to actually ask them to build and prepare a research project on their own based on these different techniques and based on different sort of components of the scientific method that they've learned throughout this class. It does have an experiential learning component attached to it as well. And again, we've always had these kind of required materials for this class. We've had them perhaps some sort of lab manual so that they can see these different sort of protocols and things that we're asking them to do in this cell and molecular course. But we have required materials listed with a question mark here because as we were going through and looking at this course and the way that we're structuring it in terms of asking these students to purchase these required materials for this class. Again, historically, from about 2009 up until around 2020, this lab manual was actually published online through an online textbook company. Now, again, online to us these days is pretty standard, right? But back in the early 2000s, this was kind of a novel idea and a novel approach. We were very excited to have this lab online. We weren't going to make students purchase this physical hard copy of this text. And so we were all excited to have this lab online for our students so that they could access this content through the course and, be able to utilize this material outside of the class as well if they wanted to use it for studying or going back and looking at the content to write lab reports, various different things. Again, students had to purchase this lab manual, so it was a required purchase that we allowed them to do for their course. They could either go directly through our bookstore or they could just publish it from the publisher's website. Now, again, the content of the manual we were perfectly happy with. We developed the content, so I guess we should be happy with it, right? So we were happy with what we were asking the students to do. But because it was an online manual, we noticed that we started to have some problems, particularly when it came time to edit a lot of the different things within that manual. Science is a pretty dynamic field. We have to be able to update our curriculum based on changes that are taking place within our fields. And so when it came time to edit this manual, because it was published by this online textbook company, we started to run into some challenges. The individuals that we were working with were great at their job. They were great with online tech and great with the editing software. But we started to have some, I guess we can call it communication gaps or communication breakdowns at times because these were non-science professionals that we were working with. We were trying to communicate scientific ideas and scientific process with them in terms of how that sort of would relate to the content that we were displaying at times. And we kept running into lots of hurdles. Things just weren't ending up, I guess, looking the way we wanted them to look. And it got to the point to where it almost felt like our manual was no longer serving the major purpose of this course. It got to where there were more technical issues, I guess we could say, than actual content issues that we were having to work around. And so as a result of that, it started allowing us to have this different mindset, this sort of transition into, well, how can we still retain this content without having these little, I guess, tech issues and things that we started finding that we were seeing. Another big issue is that, again, in early 2000s, the cost of the manual was about $45, which is a pretty reasonable price for a lab manual for students. But by the time we approached 2018, 2019, 2020, these later dates, the cost of the manual had almost doubled. So we were asking students to pay almost double of what we initially had agreed upon with this company to be able to purchase this manual, and the manual wasn't really satisfying the needs of what we thought the course needed. So again, we knew we had to have the content. We knew we needed that material to be able to relay that curriculum over to our students, but we didn't like that we were having to ask them to pay almost $100 for a lab manual that was, I guess we could say, a little subpar as to what we were hoping our goals would be. So this led us, or I say us, but mostly Dr. Schumpert here, this led us down a path of, again, trying to find a way that we could incorporate more open educational resources in this lab while still retaining that content for our students. Again, we didn't want to have them pay all this money for something that wasn't going to be beneficial for them in the course. So we wanted to have a way that we could still provide solid content for them without having to have this high cost associated with a manual that may not work for their needs. So Dr. Shumper started looking into Google Sites. So Google Sites is basically this free structured kind of wiki or website creation tool that's published by Google. So it's more of like a collaborative sort of editable website that we can use. And it's for use with all the Google Doc Editor suite. So if you have a Google account, which I'm sure most of us probably do, you have access to Google Sites. So it's very accessible. You can use it for a variety of different purposes. You can use it for professional purposes or academic purposes like we're using for this course. But there's many different things that you can do to incorporate these Google Sites into your professional careers, whether again it be academic or beyond. So this led us down this path of trying to find ways to, again, incorporate this open resource and now give us the chance to kind of tailor it to be exactly what we needed for our students.
Yeah, and we wanted to mention too, it's the manual that we had published, basically the contract, Dr. Certain, who kind of set it all up, it kind of signed away the rights. So the company kind of owned the content. We were like, uh-oh, what are we going to do here? Luckily, reached out to Amy here, and we were able to kind of start the process of trying to get the rights back. And you know, we kind of contacted like university lawyer. We were really wondering how far this was going to go. And then we just sent an email to the publisher and said, hey, get our rights back. And they were like, they literally sent back like, sure,
yeah,
you go. We were like, well,
well, that was easy.
okay. Preparing for this huge, like, drawn out legal battle, and then there we go. So I wanted to show you all a little bit Google Sites. Again, if you you know, are kind of playing around with this at home, it's relatively easy to kind of navigate into actually create something. So let's say we wanted to you know, create a Google site on the Winter Olympics. Right? So kind of start typing. You got all sorts of themes over here, and you can put cool stuff in here like curling is fun. You can add all sorts of images, text boxes, all sorts of things. You can get in there. You can change up the theme relatively easily here. And this is something too that, you know, if you've played around with things online a little bit, it starts to make a little bit more sense. Google's got a, you know, kind of a certain way that they do things. And if you're familiar with it, it definitely makes navigating Google Sites a little bit easier there. One thing that I really love about this, you can go into preview and you can see what this is going to look like on a phone, on like a tablet, or just a kind of a computer there. So for me, like when we were putting together a 302 lab manual for a Google site here, I really wanted our students to have access to this on virtually any device. So I know they're always, glued to their phones. I was like, hey, I really want them to just be able to go to this website on their phone and kind of check out this material. And so you add all sorts of fun pages in there and really get it to where you kind of want it. This is actually the 302 lab manual that we provide to our students now. And so we've kind of got, we went through, and this took probably, I don't know, maybe 8 total hours to get everything kind of in here. And we kind of provide everything on here for the students, trying to get everything laid out for them. And so we also, another thing too with our protocols that I really wanted students to be able to use is Google Docs. So a lot of students are using Google Docs for study purposes and typing things up. And so what they can do is actually come in and sort of save a copy of this for themselves. And that way they can kind of make edits and print this off if they'd like to. And I should mention too, we also have like a copy of this kind of printed out in the classroom as well, in the lab. So that way students, if they don't have access to a device, and they do have access to the manual in the lab.
So if you go back to, or scroll down or go back to that site where you have the figures, are those figures from someone else and you had to get copyright permissions, or did y'all make those?
So this was all through the textbook. I know there were a few individuals too that had worked with the original authors.
Right, yeah, so this came from the original manual, and so these sort of images we've been given permission to use them in the past. So yeah, this just was navigated over from the old manual. This was a custom image here that someone, we actually paid a consultant to draw for us. So that's a custom image that was created just for this manual. So, and a lot of the other images you could just access from free sources online too.
Yeah, a lot of this.
Unsplash, I think.
Unsplash, yeah. There's a lot of Unsplash images in here too that we credit there. Yeah, it was lucky for us too. The National Cancer Institute has their own like Unsplash page, and I was like, yes. It's really nice because from here we kind of trying to spread the good word, spread the gospel, if you will, trying to get more and kind of buy-in for OERs in biology. We've actually, this semester, we're offering a genetics lab for the first time. And we're actually using, Dr. Kristen Hogan is using a 303 lab manual that is built through Google Sites and is completely open access there. Biology 102 labs have traditionally always kind of provided sort of open educational resources, but in a sense that it's more like, here's some PowerPoints. So maybe we can recruit them. And here recently, Dr. Eric Udy, he was he heard what we did in 302 lab, and he was curious. And he's actually migrated 244 labs onto a Google site as well, and providing this completely free of charge. Before it was like oh man, he showed me the PowerPoints, and it was like 400 slides, and I'm like, oh God, so much anxiety. But he's got 244 kind of switched over, and he's working on 243 now. And he said that his students absolutely love it. More kind of push there. And in terms of lectures, maybe we can provide some more OERs there. So I know biochemistry, we found some open educational resources. Maybe we can find that for some other courses as well.
And I think when we think about too, the numbers of students that these open educational resources are already reaching just in these 3 or 4 little lab sections. I mean, this is thousands of students that take these courses over the academic year. So if you imagine a manual is roughly $100 now, that's a good bit of money that we're saving these students. So we're trying to limit that barrier between, academic success or deciding, do I need to purchase a textbook? Or, and a lot of times for students, buying textbooks causes a huge amount of anxiety. So if we can even reduce that amount of anxiety and stress that they're having, if they're just even contemplating taking one of our science courses, this could be the decision factor to say, oh, well, I actually have access to a textbook now or to a manual. So this is going to sort of allow them that time to take one of these courses and be exposed to this content. So it's, not only just the money factor, which is huge, but also just reducing anxiety and stress in students and giving them the chance to be exposed to this academic content. So just kind of finishing us up today. So just a quick little 1-minute reflection. So what are some of the major takeaways that you received or were able to get from our session today? What other questions do you think that we could address or that you might want to know the answer to? But take a few minutes, put some things in the chat for those of you guys that are listening online, and let's have a quick little discussion.
How do we get our colleges to shift their mindset around changing a traditional text to open resources?
So this is, I think, going to be one of these things where you just have to continue to share your passion for this. The more that they hear about it and the more you're able to demonstrate in different, like today's session, show off the products that you're producing here, or, show off how to access certain things in OpenStax or OER Commons. The more you talk about it and the more passionate you are about these things with your colleagues, I think that that's going to cause a little bit more of that cultural shift and hopefully convince some folks to start using these. And again, just within the last few semesters, you can see how much this has grown for us. We're now reaching 4 or 5 different total lab courses instead of just the 1302 lab. And it's all just because we're saying, hey, take a look at what we did. This could be easily transferred over into something that you're doing within your course. So sharing your passions, showing off what you're doing, and showing how easy it is to integrate it into your courses. As long as we continue with that sort of theme, I think that's what's going to help out and make that cultural shift.
So I did my marine science lab manual through Kendall Hunt. So they are trying to get me to move my lab manual online so that I have an online option, but it's still under their copyright. Did y'all have that issue?
So let's see. So whenever this online version of the lab or the manual came about, this was, again, early 2000s or so. This was under a different lab coordinator, and she actually worked through a lot of those, I guess, early issues. I was a graduate student at the time, and I worked for this coordinator. This is kind of how we got involved in this sort of thing. But it was one of these things where, again, she just kind of will provide the content, but then we're signing over the rights to it. So that was a huge hurdle when it came time for us to want to navigate back to something that's more open and accessible, which, again, we were very scared. We're like, do we need to contact a lawyer? What do? We don't know how to get our stuff back, So it was very surprising to us when they just released the content back. I think one of the major factors that played into that decision for them is that we were the only institution using that manual at the time. If that online manual had been distributed out to other institutions, I think we would have had some major problems. But because U of SC was the only one using it, I really think that was more of their deciding factor. Other companies, I know I get emails almost every day from different publishers wanting to move things online, and it's those hard conversations that you have to have with them sometimes. I mean, I get they're coming from a different perspective than we are, but if we are looking out for our students and want to make these materials more accessible, I think that we're just going to have to start using some of these other free sources that are out there, and investing a little bit more of that time that to make those resources more appropriate and sort of more tailored and geared towards what we want to accomplish in our class. Again, lots of stuff is out there, but you have to put the time into it to navigate through it, find out what's going to work for you, and find out what's going to align with your learning outcomes for your course.
And I think people don't, because I haven't taken your OER workshop, but did you give a workshop, right? I did. Yeah. So I just didn't know that there were websites just to find OER stuff. I thought you had to hunt back to find stuff. Lexi says the OER websites are very helpful. This can be helpful for students who may have to retake a course. And I know some students rent their textbooks, so this would help with the cost by not having to rent the items a second time.
Right.
So it's a good point.
A lot of publishers now build in what they call like homework units or those types of things too, that you only have access to them for that semester. So if a student ends up having to retake that course for some reason, that's an additional cost again for them to go through. So I don't know. That the cost of the budget of $1,300 a semester just seems outrageous to me for textbooks, especially when there's just so much out there already that can just be easily tapped into if you take the time to do some research ahead of time and put in that sort of investment into making that outcome what you want it to be.
Yeah. And I know from a logistics standpoint, I mean, we would send or Margaret, Dr. Certain, she would send edits to the lab manual, and 6 months later, it may still not be completed. And so from a logistics standpoint, if I needed to go in and say, hey, let's change, well, actually, a good example is here on the staining. We played around in the lab with it and found out this used to be like 14 minutes. So I could go in here and just change it, make it 5 minutes, hit publish, and basically all the students can now see the updated protocol. So it's from a logistics standpoint, man, I know having as much, and I'm kind of a perfectionist, having as much control over the content as possible is a huge upside as well.
Yeah, your updates are real time, and again, like with chapter 6 here, they're talking about this MMP9 enzyme. If some new paper comes out that has this brand new discovery about this enzyme, we could easily just put in some of that content into the manual and say, this paper was just published 2 weeks ago. Let's take a look at this since we're talking about this particular content in class. So you can keep the science relevant. You can keep your content relevant. You can continue to allow it to maintain this dynamic state as you're going through, and again, just working these things into the conversations that you're having with your students.
Yeah, that's always frustrating if you have an older manual.
Right.
Even a year, you're like, okay, on page 64, mark this out.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, I hated that.
Yeah.
Well, it really is one of those things where if changes need to be made, you kind of are relying on the authors to be willing to update.
Exactly. Yes.
Able to release new editions.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that knocks out the used book market.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. There's our contact information. You can even at me on Twitter if you want to. And we'd be happy to.